The Middle Ages are often remembered for castles, crowns, and crusades, for knights in shining armor and kings chosen by God. But beneath that romantic myth was another world, a world where survival itself was a profession, and death was simply part of the job description. There were no warning labels, no protective gloves, no understanding of bacteria, toxins, or airborne poison, only work and consequence. In medieval cities, some men descended into pits of human waste so others could sleep in clean homes. Others crawled underground toward enemy walls, knowing the earth might collapse and seal their grave. Some waded into disease-ridden swamps to harvest living parasites, bleeding slowly as they worked. These people were not heroes in chronicles. They were not saints or kings. They were necessary, and history rarely remembers the necessary. Tonight, we uncover the most dangerous jobs in medieval history, professions so lethal, so brutal, that simply surviving them was an act of defiance. Medieval society was fragile. Overcrowded cities, constant war, poor sanitation, and zero medical knowledge created an environment where disease and death were ever present. But cities still functioned, armies still advanced, clothes were still made, medicine was still practiced. That functionality came at a price. Every civilization, no matter how grand, hides its violence in plain sight, not just on battlefields, but in its labor, in the people who absorb the filth, the poison, and the danger, so the rest of society can pretend order exists. These jobs were not dangerous by accident. They were dangerous by design. The people who performed them occupied the lowest rungs of the social hierarchy: peasants, prisoners, women, apprentices, and the desperately poor. Their bodies were cheaper than innovation, their lives more expendable than reform. In this documentary, we will descend into 5 of the deadliest medieval professions ever recorded. We will examine how they worked, why they were so lethal, using modern scientific understanding, and where these workers stood in a society that needed them, yet despised them. This is not a story of glory. It is a story of exposure. Because before safety standards, before science, before human rights, someone always paid the price.
Not into a cellar, not into a basement, but into the city's bowels. Beneath medieval homes lay cesspits, open reservoirs of human waste, and when they filled, someone had to empty them by hand. That someone was the gong farmer. This was not just unpleasant work, it was lethal. Gong farmers worked exclusively at night. They climbed into cesspits and manually scooped out decomposing human excrement, loading it into barrels to be hauled away and sold as fertilizer. There were no masks, no ventilation, no understanding of toxic gases, only darkness and fumes. As waste decomposes in oxygen-poor environments, it releases a deadly cocktail of gases: methane, highly flammable and explosive; ammonia, corrosive to the lungs and eyes; and most dangerous of all, hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is a neurotoxin. At low levels, it smells like rotten eggs, but at higher concentrations, it causes olfactory fatigue, the sudden loss of smell, tricking victims into thinking the danger has passed. Minutes later, it paralyzes the respiratory system. Many gong farmers simply collapsed where they stood and drowned in liquefied waste. Cuts on their skin became entry points for pathogens. Chronic exposure led to parasitic infections, dysentery, cholera, leptospirosis, and full systemic sepsis. Life expectancy was brutally short. Some pits even ignited, methane explosions killing workers instantly. Despite preventing entire cities from collapsing under their own filth, gong farmers were treated as social contaminants. They were barred from guilds, forbidden from working during daylight, often forced to live outside city walls. Their pay was high by medieval standards, not because the work was valued, but because so few survived long enough to do it. They were tolerated, not respected. Necessary, not welcome. In many towns, a gong farmer's presence alone was considered bad luck. And yet, without them, cities would have drowned in disease. But if the gong farmer worked beneath the city, the next profession dug beneath the battlefield itself, a place where one wrong sound meant being buried alive. Above ground, war was loud, clashing steel, screaming men, charging horses. Below ground, war was silent. Here, death did not come from swords, it came from the earth itself. This was the domain of the sapper, a man sent underground to dig toward an enemy fortress, knowing that every shovel of soil could be his last. During medieval sieges, armies faced walls too thick to breach by force. The solution was subterranean warfare. Sappers excavated narrow tunnels beneath enemy fortifications, packing the supports with timber. Once complete, the wood was set on fire. When the supports burned, the tunnel collapsed, taking the wall above it with them. If everything went perfectly, the castle fell. If anything went wrong, the sapper died underground. Sapper tunnels were cramped, unventilated, and structurally unstable. As soil was displaced, oxygen levels rapidly dropped, leading to hypoxia, oxygen deprivation that causes confusion, loss of consciousness, and death. Smoke from torches and fires produced carbon monoxide, a colorless, odorless gas that binds to hemoglobin more efficiently than oxygen. Victims often collapsed without warning. Tunnel collapses caused compressive asphyxia, the chest physically unable to expand, while broken limbs trapped men alive beneath tons of earth. Some tunnels flooded, others became ovens. There was no rescue protocol. If a tunnel collapsed, it was sealed and forgotten. Claustrophobia, sensory deprivation, constant fear. Sappers worked knowing that the ground itself could betray them at any moment. Modern psychology would classify this as extreme occupational trauma. Medieval warfare simply called it duty. Sappers were rarely knights. They were peasants, prisoners of war, mercenaries, or criminals offered survival in exchange for obedience. Their names were almost never recorded, their deaths expected, their sacrifice absorbed into victory reports written by men who never went underground. To medieval generals, a sapper was not a soldier. He was a tool.
Some were tied to medicine and demanded blood. Before hospitals, before anesthesia, before antibiotics, medicine demanded blood. And someone had to collect the creatures that drank it. Bloodletting was one of the most common medical treatments of the medieval world. Physicians believed illness was caused by an imbalance of bodily humors, and leeches were the tool used to restore balance. Leech collectors waded into marshes, ponds, and swamps, allowing the parasites to attach themselves to exposed skin. Once enough leeches fed, they were carefully removed, stored in jars, and sold to doctors. Every harvest required bleeding. Leeches secrete hiruridin, a powerful anticoagulant that prevents blood from clotting. Prolonged exposure caused continuous bleeding long after the leech was removed. Some collectors lost so much blood they developed chronic anemia, leading to weakness, dizziness, and immune suppression. In extreme cases, uncontrolled hemorrhaging led to hypovolemic shock, a critical loss of blood volume. The marshes themselves were lethal environments. Stagnant water carried parasites and bacteria responsible for malaria, schistosomiasis, leptospirosis, and severe skin infections. Open bite wounds became gateways for sepsis. Many collectors suffered slow deaths, not from a single wound, but from cumulative blood loss and infection. Leech collectors were typically among the rural poor, often women,
widows, or elderly laborers with no other means of income. They were never considered medical professionals. They were suppliers, disposable links in a chain of treatment that never acknowledged their sacrifice. Doctors gained prestige, patients gained treatment, the collectors gained scars and shorter lives. But blood wasn't the only substance medieval labor demanded. Some jobs destroyed the body with chemicals. Before fine cloth touched a noble's skin, it was drowned, fermented, and beaten. And the men who did it paid with their lungs, their skin, and their bodies. This was the world of the fuller. Fulling was a critical stage in medieval textile production. Raw wool cloth was soaked and trampled to remove oils, dirt, and impurities, tightening the fibers and strengthening the fabric. The cleaning agent of choice was not soap, it was stale human urine. Urine was rich in ammonia, an effective degreasing chemical. Combined with clay or lye, it produced a corrosive mixture powerful enough to clean wool and damage flesh. Ammonia, NH3, is a caustic compound. Chronic dermal exposure caused chemical burns, ulcerations, and severe dermatitis. Open sores rarely healed in unsanitary conditions, frequently progressing to infection. Inhalation damaged mucous membranes, leading to chronic bronchitis, chemical pneumonitis, and occupational asthma. Long-term exposure permanently reduced lung capacity. The labor itself was punishing. Hours of repetitive stomping caused joint degeneration, spinal damage, and muscular breakdown. Many fullers were physically crippled by middle age. This was not craftsmanship. It was controlled bodily erosion. Fullers were technically part of textile guilds, but they occupied the lowest rung. Their work was essential, yet deeply stigmatized due to the filth and stench. They were tolerated for their output, not respected for their labor. Cloth made fortunes. Fullers destroyed themselves making it. But there was one medieval profession where danger was mistaken for enlightenment, a job that stood at the edge of science and madness. The alchemist promised miracles, gold from lead, eternal life, hidden truths of the universe. But the price of those promises was paid.